Hello, and welcome to our series, Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. I'm Russell Robinson, Chief Executive Officer of Jewish National Fund USA. The time has come to be the voice of what Zionism really is. We're exposing the beautiful and diverse facets and facts of Zionism. Join me on this journey, together with Conversations on Zionism, Reclaiming the Narrative. This is Zionism.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tremayne Smith. I am a proud millennial, progressive, and a Zionist. I was a 2017 member of the JNF Caravan for Democracy Student Leadership Mission to Israel, where I was able to experience firsthand the land and the people of Israel. I grew up a Christian in North Carolina with my twin brother, and my upbringing encouraged a curiosity for the Jewish faith and a reverence for shared Judeo-Christian values. But enough about me. We're here to have a very interesting conversation with three fascinating guests, all of whom are staunch supporters of Israel. We have Representative Alma Hernandez, who represents Arizona's 3rd House District in Tucson. She's the first Mexican-American Jewish person ever elected to public office in the United States. We also have with us Congressman Ritchie Torres, who represents New York's 15th Congressional District in the South Bronx. Upon his swearing in, Ritchie, a staunch progressive, became the first openly gay Afro-Latino American in Congress. And last but certainly not least, we have Rabbi Menachem Creditor, who serves as the Pearl and Ira Mayor Scholar in Residence at UJA Federation, New York. He's an acclaimed author, scholar, musician, and speaker, and was named by Newsweek as one of the 50 most influential rabbis in America. This is going to be a great conversation. Representative Hernandez, you're a historically significant figure, youngest woman elected to the Arizona State House of Representatives, first Mexican-American Jew to be elected to public office in the U.S. What does your background and your significance, how does that play into your worldview, and particularly to your view as a Zionist?
Thank you for mentioning that, but I know that we have a long way to go, and we need to continue to work hard to ensure that we have people that look like me and people that come from our communities serving in these spaces. So for me, it's an honor to obviously serve in the legislature and to do this work, but I also got involved with the pro-Israel world very young. I was in high school when I started my involvement. And ever since then, it's like one of those things that you get involved in and you just can't leave. It's like politics. Once you're in, it's hard to get out. But for me, it's really shaped me into who I am today. I serve as the chair of the bipartisan caucus in the Arizona legislature in Arizona. So although I am, yes, very much progressive, I am a very progressive candidate, and I'm a very progressive woman, I still try my best to work with everyone from every side. I think when it comes to issues like Israel, and that's part of the reason why I now am very good at talking to people from every side, is because of my work and activism when it comes to protecting Israel. So it has shaped me into who I am today. Obviously, I come from a very different background than most other electeds. So I do have different lived experiences that have kind of led me and continue to lead me down the path of being an advocate for Israel, being an advocate for our people, and making sure that I'm doing my best in the Capitol and as an elected official to hold people accountable when it comes to these issues.
I appreciate that. Thank you so very much. I'll turn to you, Rabbi. You're phenomenal. You are an acclaimed author, a scholar, a musician. I'm a musician as well, so maybe we'll get together, and a speaker. And I understand correctly that you were named by Newsweek as one of the 50 most influential rabbis in America. So that's quite a podium from which you have to voice your stance and opinions. Talk about the significance of that platform and what you've been able to succeed at doing because of that.
Thanks, Tremayne. I appreciate the question so much because what it also is asking, though you didn't make it explicit, is what do we do with the privilege of our platforms, the obligations that come along with it All of our personal narratives are different, but there's no question that when we reach a kind of prominence, people will listen. And if we are quiet, they'll hear that too. So not only should we avoid speaking ill, but we have to make sure that the prominence we have is leveraged for the benefit of others. That's what it is to live a life of service. So on the one hand, it was incredibly flattering to be named by Newsweek in that way. But I mean, people are counting rabbis. Rabbis should make sure that what they say and do count. That's the work.
Amen to that. As someone raises a Southern evangelical, that's amen to that. Congressman, it's so good to see you. Let me just first say, I was so very impressed and surprised by just how much you and I have in common. I also grew up in a single mother household. I'm also openly gay, and I have a twin brother. So we're like kindred spirits. So good to chat with you today. Let me just begin by saying, if you're much like me in conversations that I have around Judaism and Zionism and being a Zionist, people think that you can't be both a progressive and a Zionist. What do you say to that?
I mean, Zionism is essentially the belief that Israel is the nation state of the Jewish people. And one of the purposes of Israel is to protect a historically oppressed people from a repeat of our worst history. So if that is not progressive, then I'm not sure what would be. Progressivism is about the struggle for liberation, and Zionism is the struggle for Jewish liberation.
I hear you. That's real. And sort of following through on that, I know that you gave what I consider a pretty amazing speech on the floor of the House of Representatives on Israel's Independence Day. What exactly compelled you to do that?
For me, is the story of Israel is a source of inspiration for all of us. In the span of only 7 decades, historically oppressed people have come together and built one of the most vibrant and innovative and liberal democratic societies the world has ever seen. And that story should be told. And it serves as a reminder of what we as a species can achieve. And so I thought it was important to tell a story of human resilience and resourcefulness in the midst of COVID-19.
Now, let's talk just a bit about your, I guess, the origin story, the beginning of your journey, as I think was noted in an interview that I read, where you said your journey began with the trip to Israel in 2015 that was sponsored by the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York. What led you to take that trip? And then just give us a bit of a readout as to how that informed or changed you to evolve to where you are now.
So when I first entered public office, the New York City Council back in 2014, I was a clean slate on the subject of Israel and the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I had no real knowledge of geopolitics. I had never even traveled abroad before, and I was given the opportunity to join a council delegation to Israel. And when I announced that I was going to Israel, I was taken aback by the overwhelming hatred and vitriol directed toward me. And there was one encounter in particular that left a lasting impression on me. I met an activist who had a shirt that read, "Queers for Palestine." And so I approached her and asked, what is your opinion of Hamas? And she said, I stand with Hamas because Hamas is defending the liberation of the Palestinian people. And at that moment, I was in a state of shock. I said to myself, what would prompt an LGBTQ activist to defend an organization that systematically and savagely murders LGBTQ people? It was inexplicable to me. And then over time, I came to realize that there was a dangerous idea percolating in progressive politics, the idea that you cannot be both pro-Israel and progressive, which is a vicious lie. And so I would go to a criminal justice reform rally and the following words would be spoken from Mexico to Palestine. Or criminal justice, or that was an immigration reform rally. Or I would go to a criminal justice reform rally and someone would say from Ferguson to Palestine. And as a normal person, I would ask, what does Ferguson and Mexico have to do with Palestine? Right. And the answer is nothing. But the purpose of the BDS movement is to make everything about Israel, is to turn every progressive cause into a delegitimation campaign against Israel. And so I saw clearly the extremism that was taking hold in my political home, the progressive movement. And when you see something wrong, you can either remain silent or you can speak out.
Talk a little bit about the composition of your background and how that informs your worldview and the importance of the American-Israel relationship.
I come from an unusual background. I do not fit into the profile of a typical member of Congress. I do not have deep pockets or deep political connections. I do not have fancy credentials or a net worth of $1 million, which is the average net worth in Congress. What I bring to the table is the wisdom of lived experience, is the empathy that comes from lived experience. I know what it's like to experience racism and colorism and homophobia. I know what it's like to struggle with food insecurity and housing insecurity and poverty. I know what it's like to have family caught up in the grip of the criminal justice system. So out of my lived experiences come empathy, and that empathy applies to the security challenges confronting Israel and the plight of the Jewish people writ large. And so that might explain one of the roots of my support for Israel and the American-Israeli relationship. The philosopher Aristotle once divided friendship into 3 categories. He said there are friendships of utility. I'm friends with you because you're useful. Transactional relationships, networking. There are friendships of pleasure. I'm friends with you because I enjoy your company. And then there are friendships of virtue, the highest form of friendships. I'm friends with you not because of what I can get from you, but because of who you are. And the relationship between Israel and the United States is not simply a transactional strategic alliance. It's the highest form of friendship. It's a friendship of virtue. It's a friendship built on mutual love and shared values. And that's a relationship worth preserving for the sake of liberal democracy throughout the world.
I hear that. I appreciate you sharing that. Let me turn back to you, Alma. I found this really amusing and awfully like, yeah, she's got it. You are a loud and proud Zionist. And you even, I think your license plate says Zionist. Where does that moxie come from? And why apply it to being a Zionist?
So yes, my license plate very much says Zionist. It took me a while to get it approved by the state Department of Transportation, but it was approved. I'm very proud of it. Although sometimes it does scare me a little bit. I'm not going to lie. I've had some situations in the last few weeks. I haven't been going anywhere, so I haven't moved my car. But in the last few weeks, I've had a few situations that were both good and some that were bad. When it comes to the issue of being a Zionist and being so outspoken and unapologetic about it, I think, I'm a progressive because I'm a Zionist. All of the issues that we're talking about, whether it's women's health, healthcare, LGBTQ rights, all of the issues that I care about are all issues that Israel has been at the forefront for years, right? This is the only democracy in the Middle East, the only place that we know has actually given people dignity and respect and allowed them to serve in government the way that they are. So when I have in the circles that I'm in as a progressive and as someone very involved in my party, sometimes I'm being told you have to pick one side or the other. You can't do both, or you have to check one of your identities at the door. And I refuse to do that. When I got involved in high school, I knew it wasn't going to be an easy issue to work on, but I was very determined to make sure that I wasn't the only one in my party and that I would not be the last one, certainly, to be doing this work. And for me, it's really important for people to know that whatever issue it is that you care about, you should never allow anyone, especially people in our party and in leadership, to tell us that we have to choose the side, because all of these sides are what make us who we are. And I refuse to be told that I have to choose or leave one of my identities at the door, because that's not who I am. So I've made it very clear since I ran for office 3 years ago that the work that I do and everything that I stand for, I will never compromise my values to make other people feel good. And I will never do something that makes me uncomfortable because others are wanting to be happy, or be told that I'm doing something wrong because they don't agree. We can agree to disagree, and in politics, we just have to be willing to do that. And, it's not an easy thing being so loud and proud, I guess, with sometimes in my party. And some things have happened in the last few days that have left me feeling a little frustrated. But at the end of the day, I'm not going to leave my party, and I'm not going to abandon all the issues and everything I care about because of that. Either people can take it or leave it, but I'm not changing who I am to please others. And I really hope that others, will join me and say, we're not leaving our identities at the door, and we're not checking these boxes just to make you feel good. So, I continue to do that, and I will continue to do it, and I'll never compromise or cave into political pressure.
Good. Yeah, we need fighters. Congressman Torres said it, and you're saying it. We need people to fight, and particularly for what's right and for what's good. So thank you for being one of those fighters. And Rabbi, you're a fighter too. And I want to go to Rabbi, to a mission that you led in 2014 of progressive rabbis to Israel. And while there, I think you were caught up in Operation Protective Edge, having only 90 seconds, I understand, to run to a bomb shelter. Did that experience alter your perspective on Israel?
Well, it reinforced my commitment to Israel and to its security. And at the time, I was a pulpit rabbi in Berkeley, California. Now, I was there for a million reasons, including the fact that, my politics do run progressive through and through. Leading a group of American rabbis, progressive American rabbis, to Israel was about sharing what it is to have that kind of synthesized vision for the world, for Israel, for America, for everyone, where you can really be a whole person with all the facets of who you are. When we landed, that's when the first missiles started flying from Gaza into the civilian populations in Israel. And so it didn't alter what I felt, but it reinforced it and made it more real. In fact, we were leaving a bomb shelter that we had to run into within those 90 seconds that we were going to be, please God, safe during. We walked out and we were shaken, but then I looked at our bus driver and realized he had nowhere to run within 90 seconds. And then we looked up at the sky and there was a puff of smoke in the air where Iron Dome had knocked out a missile that was about to land on us. And so, no, nothing changed except everything became much more urgent and much more real.
Pretty terrifying experience, but also it sheds light on the realities of current days and the importance of America's friendship with Israel and all that comes with that.
There's no better gift to give or receive than one that can connect you with nature and your homeland. JNF has made it super easy for you to order your tree certificate online. Just go to jnf.org/trees, pick which special occasion it's for, whether a birth, bar mitzvah. Just order your tree online and let's get planting. Every tree counts. As a memorial to a loved one, as a tribute for a special occasion, as a link to your heritage, as a link to the land of Israel, to help the environment and reduce your carbon footprint. Every tree counts.
I want to talk about the rise of anti-Semitism and particularly the proliferation of it on social media, and how social media has those who identify both as progressive and Zionist feeling like they must choose a side. I know you've been very outspoken, even with members of your own party who have a pretty different idea and view of this issue than you.
Say the wrong view. Yeah.
The absolute wrong view in the
deeply
wrong direction.
progressive.
Yeah. So let me ask you, without getting confrontational, how do you exist in the same space, and how do you speak to folks who are sort of the same ilk to try to get them to see this point of view?
I can only persuade those who have a genuinely open mind. I mean, I have a role in life. I never reason with people who refuse to be reasoned with. And so one example is not colleagues, but the Yale student government passed a resolution accusing Israel of genocide. And like, how do I debate? How do I have a rational discussion with anyone who thinks that Israel's committing genocide? Like, according to the Palestinians Authority's own numbers, the Palestinian population has risen to a historic high of about 14 million. Right? The Israeli Arab population has gone from somewhere in the range of 100,000 in 1948 to nearly 2 million today. If there were genocide, why is there an upward trend in the Palestinian population?
Mm-hmm.
So I am willing to engage in a conversation with anyone. But if you're operating in a post-factual political environment, then there's no hope for persuasion.
That's true. And sort of tying into that, but going back to a former point that you made, Representative Hernandez, I understand that you fought very hard to get a Holocaust education bill passed by the Arizona legislature and then signed by the governor. Do you think that understanding the Holocaust helps people understand Zionism and Israel better, or do you think not?
Absolutely. You know, the way that I see it is, first, yes, it was not an easy feat to get Holocaust education done in Arizona. You'd think it would be easy because it should be a no-brainer and it should be something that most people care to learn about and care for their children to learn about. However, it took 3 years. When I got elected the first time, I ran the bill, ran it 3 times, and the third time it was a charm. We finally got it done. And mainly the reason we got it done on year 3 was because I had 3 Holocaust survivors who had started the process helping me. They all passed, 3 of them passed away and sadly no longer with us. And I kept pleading with my colleagues saying, you know, we don't have many survivors left. They're dying, they're sick. And I think it's a disservice to them as our constituents that we are not pushing this when we have broad support. It passed unanimously, but it was all political games that were being played with this bill at the beginning up until year 3. So fast forward, we got the bill signed about a month and a half ago. I was able to have some survivors there with me, which was really neat. But it's something that people really need to learn. We need to teach, especially the younger generations, about the horrors of the past to ensure that it never happens again. We have so many young adults, so many Gen Zs, so many children who have no idea what the Holocaust is. They can't even, name a concentration camp. They have no clue that this even happened. And that's because we haven't done a good job of teaching these things to communities that are not from our communities. I was very fortunate growing up that I had a teacher, Teresa Dolgoff, who was a Holocaust survivor. She taught me about the Holocaust in 2nd grade. Was very fortunate. Our school was very fortunate to have her. And I was really honored that when I ran the bill, she was able to come and testify on behalf of my bill. Like, that to me was the ultimate, I was so proud. I said, if I can't get this done, at least knowing that someone who has known me my entire life, who taught me about what happened to her family, would be standing next to me to get this done. And we finally did it. And until we teach these stories, until we make sure that we're uplifting the voices of the survivors and their families, we're going to continue seeing a rise of anti-Semitism. We're going to continue seeing a rise of hate against the Jewish community. Why? Because people don't know what happened and how we were led to that situation. And quite honestly, we wouldn't have Israel if we didn't have Zionism. Right. And I think it's really important for us to teach, the younger generations that without Zionism, we would have no Israel. Absolutely. And we have to do everything possible to educate, but also make sure that we are, again, not forgetting the stories of the survivors, because we wouldn't all be where we are now if it wasn't for them.
That's right. Education is so important, and teaching and reaching people. And that stirred something up for me. Rabbi, I have a question. And this is actually from your brother-in-law, Arsen Ostrowski, who had a conversation with Russell Robinson in the series a few months ago. And your brother-in-law said, there's obviously little doubt that we're seeing an increasing separation in the distance between progressive Jews in America and in the state of Israel. What does each side need to hear from the other, Rabbi, to be convinced that each other has each other's backs?
It's a great question. The first thing that I would do, with reverence for our conversation is reject the question. I don't think that we should enter into this conversation scared, nor with the presumption that we should convince each other. That's not how real relationships are maintained and truth is reached. I think the real goal should be for anyone who claims the word progressive to remember that progressive ideology means the world can be better because of things we can do together. And those who see the word progressive as suspicious should abandon their suspicion and ask questions instead. So too should those who can't imagine that Israel could ever do right open your hearts and your minds a little bit and say, what is it that Israel does right, and how can I help Israel do even better? Which means bring my progressive commitment to my Zionism. And if you don't use the word progressive to define yourself, the real question is, why not? Do you think it's only lined up with certain political stances, or is it a vision that the world can be better because of what we can do together? That's true of any nation, be it my homeland, be it this nation, be it anywhere. There is incredible hope in seeing human possibility when we come together, and so much of our political discourse is making it harder to hear each other. So instead of convincing each other, I think we just need to spend some time together.
That's right. Amen. Back to the amen. Amen to that. So, Congressman, what's next for you? How do you continue this advocacy? What are steps that, say, me, also a millennial progressive Zionist, can take to further this cause, this righteous cause?
What's next for me? Well, hopefully, eventually retirement. I would say we have an obligation to speak out. We cannot allow ourselves to be drowned out or crowded out by the extremes. We cannot live in fear of the extremes. We have to have the integrity and the courage to be forcefully and fearlessly pro-Israel. Because if we allow ourselves to be censored, then we've lost. People are I often say that, yes, I'm millennial, I'm Black, I'm Latino, I'm progressive, and I'm pro-Israel, and I'm pro-Israel not despite my progressivism, but because of it. And we need a whole movement of Gen Zers and millennials who are sending that message, who are driving that message home, who are offering an alternative to the divisive and destructive narrative that has increasingly dominated progressive politics in America. When we fight back, we can win. And the good people can prevail.
Well, I think that's an evergreen truth. Good can prevail. And when you fight back, you can win.
You have to fight. The most important thing to know about me is that I'm a fighter. Right? Nothing was handed to me on a silver platter. I had to fight for everything that I have in my life. And we have to fight for the friendship of virtue that is the American-Israeli relationship.
Well, continuing the fight, we shall. Let me tell you, I've really enjoyed this conversation. And let me just end by saying I am hopeful that, I'm reminded of the African proverb, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. Well, it's very clear we can't do this alone and that there's no quick solution. But I am hopeful that we will continue to go together with leaders like you and that eventually we will go far. So todah rabah for your time, and thank you for your leadership and your advocacy for Israel. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Blessed.
I want to encourage you all to please subscribe to the Zionism Studio ZTV channel on YouTube.